at the 2014 NCDD conference. In any case, you came on to a little hosting team, and we put on a 10-week conference for facilitators on social transformation. And that's how I really got to know you. And that was before you, I think, were doing anything with a growing culture. And then suddenly I didn't stay in touch with you for very long after that. But then I got very interested in the Academy for Professional Dialogue, of course, and got involved with the US Academy. And lo and behold, you followed me there, and you are now on the board of that organization along with Nancy. So it's a small world. And your background is amazing. Robert's an environmental lawyer. He's done work in survey research work. He is a man of many, many talents and much wisdom. And his work with the growing culture is phenomenal. Now that I've read more into a growing culture, I can well understand kind of sort of what attracted you there, because it's doing very, very deep work in the world today, globally. So I think I'd like to just get started. I could say so many more things about you, Robert, but I think just hearing your story of what attracted you to a growing culture, and then we're going to kind of branch into aspects of how dialogue works for you in that environment, and how we might look at it from sort of a broader global transformation perspective, which we certainly need right now, because things are not going well, certainly in our country and in much of the rest of the world. So please, how did you get involved with a growing culture? And let's hear a little bit about that, and then we'll take it wherever we need to take it.
Well, first, thank you, Linda, and thank you, Nancy, for including me in this good service that you provide the community. I am really happy to be here. It's been a fascinating journey to today because, and I don't mean my whole life history, but I do mean thinking about what I have said I would talk about is very exciting and daunting, because we're dealing with a huge, huge subject. And so there are two questions you asked. One was about me, and then what is it about a growing culture that brought me there? I have been kind of a practicing generalist. I started my career as a criminal lawyer, and then became an environmental lawyer, public interest, and also I did some welfare law. But at the same time, I became extremely interested in comparative traditions around the world. I spent 12 years apprenticing to Guillermo Longo y Vasquez, who was a shaman who taught me quite a bit about the nature of this wonderful living being called the earth. And at some point, I realized that while I was winning cases, even as far up as the New Jersey Supreme Court, and in presenting in front of the US Senate on recombinant DNA research early on, I realized that I was sometimes winning and it didn't make any difference, so I left. And I started deciding to merge the realm of the professional world and what I see in people with what I came to understand is going on the planet. So I did leave. I was actually going to go out to New Mexico, where my dear friend Glenna is, and represent artists and dancers and the three cultures as an intellectual property lawyer. But I had an opportunity to run a foundation, and that's where I developed a lot of organizational development skills, starting organizations. And some of this was laid out in the very nice flyer that Nancy and Linda sent out. But while I spent 11 years there starting organizations, I found myself thereafter working with Gallup, the big polling company, setting up their international arm for survey research on social issues. And there we did a study, the largest ever done, on environment and development in 30 countries in in-person surveys. And there was a day in my life in Athens when we were meeting survey researchers from from these 30 countries. And I had to break up the day and have some time with everyone to see what page they were on. And at the end of the day, after talking through the survey instrument and hearing where they were, learning that there were no words for environment in certain countries, no words for development in certain countries, I began to realize as I fell asleep that indeed I had a pulse of the planet that day. I really did. These people gave me something, and I couldn't, how do you contain something like that? So that's some of the background. I thereafter started my own consulting company and worked with cultural institutions, universities, organizations, doing consulting in a variety of mission-oriented work. Dialogue, even as a young lawyer, I spent an interesting time with the American Arbitration Association, and I was very interested in it, and conflict resolution and mediation, and helped start an organization that related to marriage mediation across the state of New Jersey. But for me, it, I think, really took off because of one of the people here, and that's you, Glenna. We met at this wonderful program that Glenna offered called, I think it was called something like Dialogue as a Spiritual Practice. And this was a very useful experience, even though I had spent years in the foundation bringing people together, organizing ideas, building organizations. Nothing helped me as much as that program in understanding something about inner dialogue. And that merged well with a strong interest I had in spiritual programs and spiritual practices around the world that have been going on for years. And in fact, at some point, not that long ago, 2019, I edited a book entitled Journeys and Awakenings, Wisdom for Spiritual Travelers, which had a cross-section of people from around the world in all different disciplines sharing what was their path to understanding wisdom. So with this in mind, in 2010 or so, I was in a wedding in Washington, D.C., and I ran into a young fellow named Lauren Cardelli, and I had known him a little bit, but we ended up standing there against the wall, hobnobbing for around a half hour, and I heard that he had been on 2,500 farms, and that he had gotten interested in this because all over the world, he had gotten interested in this because of one incident in his life. And that was, even though he knew a lot about farming, because he went to a school in Vermont, which taught college using all the aspects of learning that you can do in all the subjects through farming. There was a time when he was walking in the jungles of Belize and he came upon a young man carrying his child. The young man was crying and the child had died. And the child had died because it had drunk some effluent that looked like water. And it was a horrible experience for everyone, of course. And we hear these stories all the time. But for him, it meant there had to be a better way. This is not acceptable. This was a farmer who should not have had this happen. And it was very moving. And the more he spoke, the more I realized how remarkably impressive he was at the age of 24, and how he had established relationships all over the world. And that given his personality, he was non-threatening and well-informed. And with those things in mind, he had, with another friend, come to the conclusion that they should start an organization. And they had a name for it. It was a growing culture. And you know, you can sit in that name and you can find richness in it in so many different levels. So I found myself in some ways thinking about mentoring him. I knew a lot about starting organizations. And as a result, he started building one, and I coached him in building a board and so forth. And eventually, I should have seen it coming. He said, would you be willing to be on the board? That was 2011. And I have been on the board ever since. And like any new enterprise, it's hard. Going from nothing to something. I think it was Blaise Pascal, the great French theologian and thinker, philosopher, who said the idea is everything. And it is. We are such a glorious species that we can come up with an idea and something can actually be made. So I was very proud to slowly see the stumbles and then the little successes, and then, you know, began to meet some of these people around the world that he knew. And of course, he was growing his own network and growing it and growing it. That was a long time ago. We had 3 or 4 different mission statements between then and now. Now the mission statement is food sovereignty everywhere for everyone. This is not food stability. We can get into that. It's food sovereignty. You can be food stable in prison, but you don't have choices. So today, we have on Instagram, we had on Instagram at the beginning of COVID, 700 followers. I was pretty impressed. I mean, I have a few hundred maybe, and I don't even get on Instagram. But COVID really offered an opportunity. The opportunity was to consolidate all these relationships and have folks hear from one another. So today, as we speak, we'll probably hit 75,000 followers. And this is without any PR firm helping us whatsoever. And it's because of who we've become that I, many times, and because of this process, I've been in working with Linda and Nancy and others, some of whom are on the call, like Tom O'Connor and Thomas and Timo. There's been an opportunity for me to say, when I hear about all these wonderful dialogue activities, they're all super important and contained. They're contained in the sense that they're activities in a community. They're activities in an organization. They're activities, as we've all heard about, Vedak, in a prison, which are just remarkable. And they give everyone some degree of hope. But what about the activities that need to happen around the world to address injustices, to address what's happening in many places, which when you hear about it, you say, oh my goodness, and you realize you can't do anything about it. I'm not so sure we can't do anything about it. So I became very, very involved. And Nancy, I promised you I would make breaks in my words so that I don't keep going, because people who've known me a long time, like Glenna and Annette, know that I can keep going. So I do have 3 key points I'd like to talk about. And I can say them and stop, or we can stop for a moment here.
Let's stop for a moment here.
Good.
And that was a very moving statement, Robert. And the story you told was very moving. And you're saying the idea is everything. That's a lovely phrase. I think that's true. If I think about what Martin Luther King has done and so forth, the idea is everything, I think. So that's, I'll keep that as a very precious phrase. So one of the things that you said, I don't know if it was in the piece that I wrote or if it was something you said to me earlier, but you said the people that come to the interview may have a narrower view of dialogue than I have. And so how would you then, if that's true, and I don't know if it is, we'd have to ask the people in the group, which we'll do shortly, but so how would you broaden the idea of dialogue beyond what you assume or think may be a narrow definition of it?
Thank you. And I'll go to David Bohm, because as I understood his writings and probably some of the film work that's been done on him, as a physicist, he had a creative and courageous appreciation that everything, including meaning, is forever unfolding. And as a scientist, that means that nothing stops. I remember I met someone in 2008, which is the real year I actually met you, Linda. I think, but I remember going up to someone, blanking on his name, and we had spoken on the phone, and I said, you know, creation never stopped. I thought it was a fun starter to the conversation, and it was. It really led to a lot. That things don't stop unfolding, and scientists know that. Our appreciation of that in understanding human communications opens us to the other, because the other is always unfolding. We're always unfolding. And if we do that in dialogue, we really help what wants to come through between us. And I love that. I love that. It keeps you fresh. Now, to the heart of your question, I fundamentally believe, and in my bones, I think I know it, that dialogue is our natural default when we individually and collectively attain a capacity to be present and really connect with our deepest roots, our ancestors, our indigeneity. And I think we've lost that. How do you find that? I mean, we're in a society that has a dominant economic and social narrative here on Earth that's deeply embedded, primarily responsible for propelling us toward what some would say is disaster. And there are choices that we need to unlearn and replace that. A lot of the dialogue in organizations is really wonderful if they can use it well and then go on and they can have a higher success rate if they're trying to improve their bottom line. But it's not for me in context with the larger issues. And I wouldn't be interested in facilitating, and in my career always avoided the opportunities to work in areas where I thought I was going to do more harm than good if I succeeded. And the fork in the road actually happened to me. I was representing the public of New Jersey in a case before the Utility Commission trying to close the largest hazardous waste landfill in the world. Kinbuck crosses the Raritan River in New Brunswick. And I got to know the lawyer for the garbage industry on the other side. And one day he offered me a job. And he said, "Big bucks, Bob." No one called me Bob, but he did. didn't help his case, and I didn't take the offer. I said, not only, Ted, is it inappropriate for you to do this while we're in the middle of a hearing, but I don't think that's who I am. And I actually thought of leaving law soon thereafter. So I guess I come to this whole orientation to the land through as a child. I think that the issues that we're facing around the planet haven't changed since I was born. Those conditions which hold these negative systems in place require shifts and strategies built around visions that are rooted in the health and the agency of living beings. And currently they're not. But those living beings who can work collaboratively, non-competitively, with a mutual concern, I think that's what David Bohm was talking about. I think when he was talking about this whole system, he was talking about this planet and our piece of it. In other words, we are a piece of that hologram. And the planet is a piece of the larger hologram. So from my standpoint, I think the world needs dialogue, but toward what end? And so I'll stop there and hope that answered some of what you
And in a
heard.
sense, I hear you, Robert, I hear you saying we're not having the right dialogues. We're not having dialogues about the right issues.
No, well, I think I don't want to leave that impression whatsoever. I see my friend Mino there. What she's doing in peacemaking is gorgeous, heartfelt, spiritually grounded, intelligent, important. And I think probably everyone here is doing something that's aligned along those lines. So I don't want to say that. And I would disagree with anyone who does. I'm simply raising the question of how broadly can dialogue be brought to bear? And does it have to be called dialogue for it to be dialogue? I've made that statement in some academy meetings, and it's an interesting question. And you and Linda, Nancy, and I have talked about that on occasion. The bigger issues deserve to be looked at by people who are working in the field of dialogue. And I don't mean the other issues that they're working on are small. What I do mean is, and that's what we can talk about in terms of a growing culture. I can give many examples, and I think that might be the better way to go than doing it in a vacuum.
And let me turn it over to Linda and let her have a chance in here.
Yeah, the question I think I'd like to go back to, Robert, is what you saw in a growing culture, because when I started to look at a growing culture, the website and the stories that are on it, and I encourage any and all of you to just Google a growing culture and just spend 10 minutes reading some of the stories. They're just so amazing. What I really got was that the dialogue takes place at a more basic level with the people who have been marginalized. In other words, they're doing it naturally. Nobody has to teach them how to dialogue. So when people become somewhat powerless in their own lives, they know how to dialogue. We don't have to teach them. And so perhaps it's a bottoms up process that you're suggesting when you say maybe some of us are thinking of it too narrowly. Is that taking it back to kind of what you're getting at?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Linda. There's a lot of harm being done to the environment, and it's part of a process that is a narrative that we've become numb to. We've become numb to it. It is our collective way of being in the world that industrial agriculture feeds people. It's a myth, but it is our way. We cannot we cannot talk about any of the big issues, whether it be racism, climate change, violence and war, without understanding what brings these things about. And I wrote down a statement which I thought I would share at some point. And it's simply this, that we cannot reverse the harm to our environment by entrusting it to the same groups that devastated it. To truly understand the root causes of things like soil degradation, like land theft of farmers, like the killing of farmers and the reasons behind it, like climate change, which farming and agriculture contributes 30+% to, without thinking about how can we nurture it back to health. We have to seek help from those communities that have been saving soil and doing healthy working healthfully in the arable lands of the planet for hundreds and thousands of years. And yet over the last 50 years, we have turned everything over to industrial agriculture. They now control 70% of the arable land, produce 30% of the world's food. The other 30% of the arable land is inhabited by farmers who have been farming the same way for generation upon generation. And they produce 70% of the world's food. There's something wrong with that picture. So what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? It goes to that food has become a commodity. It's sold like shoes, like reams of paper. And as long as we keep ignoring those things, which the UN Food and Agricultural Organization has come to see as a real problem, and we've been in touch with them, and our partners have been in touch with them, we cannot make any difference. And what folks don't know, and I had to learn a number of things in order to really feel like I could be present at a board meeting and be a responsible chair of the board. And what I really had to learn is that there's a lot of discomfort in unlearning what I made assumptions about in the field of agriculture. Market-based food is not about nutritious calories in people's stomachs, but as I say, it's commodities. Industrial agriculture uses methods to destroy the soils. They may be productive, but they're going to soon be despoiled. Industrial agriculture privatizes seeds. There was in the 60s a law, a global agreement to be able to patent seeds, so that people who've had seeds in their family for 500 years pass them on year after year for 500 years. And if that seed gets picked up by one of the 4 companies that controls seeds in the world, which is a lot of power, or fertilizers in the world, and privatizes it, they can charge you they can sue you for using seeds that come out of your family. Now, the water gets destroyed, the air can get destroyed, children's lives and the cultures that they yearn to grow into get destroyed, and the culture lacks cohesion. This is the story of the food system. People say there's not enough food. That's a myth. That's just that the system is unjust. so that some of the people who are hungry in this world are farmers. The largest percentage of them are farmers. Now, I can spend 15 minutes explaining that, but suffice it to say that the bottom line is that so many people, and I feel like I'm going too long again, Nancy, but so many people have lost their land that they've been on because they've been forced by governments in collaboration with these industrial agriculture, monstrously large companies, been forced to start using fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and then grow this product and this product, which is not part of their culture. And it's going on everywhere, so that they are landless in a very fundamental sense. And every time you use these pesticides and herbicides, you are releasing carbon into the air. And, you know, I have a slide here that I can show you about how much carbon is protected and held by the earth when you're doing agriculture the ways that every one of our ancestors did it. And I say that because—
So Robert, can I bring us back to dialogue for a minute and
Yes.
ask you then, you've really poignantly said that the problem is. Now, how is it that dialogue can be used as a tool then for what is I think you're talking about a system change? How can that happen?
Yeah. So it is simply fascinating to me that, going back to those numbers of people who have come together, that they've all come together. What a growing culture actually was able to do was two things. One, they were able to provide support to these small organizations all over the planet that got very interested in being heard. I spent some time in in Uganda, facilitating farmers from 7 countries who wanted to put together a way of communicating with each other. And the whole process was dialogue. Did we call it that? No. But it was dialogue. And why are they able to all come together? Because there's a difference between urgency, where your back is up against the wall. You will have a natural inclination to listen deeper if trust is built. And that's what we were able to do. And that's what they were looking for. A movement can be supported through this process, whether it's called dialogue or not. And the positioning of 2 organizations in communication builds networks. And then it builds beyond the 2 to many, and there becomes shared recognition between many organizations. And what are they doing? They're looking for opportunities to collaborate. And as they begin to collaborate, they're thinking about the longer timeline, not dealing so much with the immediate urgency. They can't push anybody off their land. So it's the long view that becomes a significant dimension. And if they go for immediate change, that they only can come up with Band-Aids. So it becomes a movement. And there's an excitement in doing things together. AGC recognize what the differences are between the different organizations and help them see these differences so that they can not be duplicating what each other is doing. The other thing AGC is doing is helping them understand local communication so that they can be messaging and providing and teaching others in their own reasonable geography, which is what I like to call it. So the relationship is not just instrumental to an end, it's very human, which is what we all look for in dialogue. Being in each other's lives is as important as the collaboration, ultimately. And knowing that you have more to learn, knowing that you don't know is an important asset because you can bring it forward. And so when you're doing all these things, you're using dialogue very, very well. And groups know that they are learning in a different pace, they're engaging in a new way, and they can be more, I mean, one of the folks I know from the Philippines is remarkably strong woman. She's now on our board. She heads up a movement of farmers that's crossed the Philippines. We hear in the Philippines about what Duterte did to drug users, 25,000 drug users killed. Well, there's also been over 400 farmers killed to get their land. So, but she is neither negative, she's not a negativist or a positivist, she's an activist. And you know what the difference that makes? She can still find joy because she's engaged and she's deeply involved in working every day, using dialogue every day. So each of these groups might maybe rejigger their work, how they do it, become more specialized in one thing, and then make shifts to another. But what we now see are some results. We see things happening in different places. And I'd be glad to talk about some of that. But
well, let me turn it over to Linda. We have probably about another 5 or 6 minutes, Linda, before we go into groups. Is there another question you'd like to put to Robert?
I do. I have a burning question. So I hear what you're saying is that dialogue probably doesn't even need to be formally taught if it's being used as a movement builder at the grassroots. I really hear your passion around that, and I can understand that it is making a difference when you bring people together and have them share their life experiences. I guess my burning question, though, is do you see the usage of dialogue being important? I mean, what you're really getting at is in terms of the problem, is the unfettered unfettered capitalism that's unleashed in the world doing all the damage, right? And no one's really looking at what that damage is and naming it for what it is. In fact, we are very unconscious of it in our more advanced parts of the world. We just go to the grocery store and assume that that's how, that's how we make food, right? And we don't damage. So the question is, do you see dialogue also working from the top down in some way that's useful for people here to know about?
And by top down, you're referring to?
Well, getting people who are actually exploiting people and using industrial agriculture that's causing so much harm in the world. So are there opportunities to use dialogue in that domain? Or do you see the real work in movement building from the bottom up?
The latter.
I know that's what you're emphasizing, yeah.
Yeah, there's very little incentive. I mean, you can look at, are any of you familiar with B corporations? A B Corp is a vetted group that's supposedly doing good in the world. Now, you take a big company like Nestle's. It's huge. It exploits children. There's an enormous number of children who are child laborers being exploited for chocolate. Nestle's has a subsidiary, which is now a B Corp. It serves them well to have that. However, on the top, they don't change whatsoever. There's no incentive. So the challenges are to build alternative narratives. And the alternative narrative that we're building, as I mentioned to some of you, One of the things we've done, which was come up, which was the idea came from that same woman in the Philippines who joined the board and said, what if? All ideas, what if? And the what if was, what if we, now that we have all these, long list of members or of partners globally and locally, what if we actually held press conference for the individual groups where 5 or 6 minutes each, we would help them frame the most poignant, powerful story that's a big teaser for the press to come, and we'd give them the follow-up information on how to be in touch. And what if we did that? So we figured, why not? Why not try it? So we invited 600 press from around the world. And we got like 250 that put their hand up. We told them it's invitation only, no one else is going to be there, but you'll hear each one of these stories. Mm-hmm. We have Forbes, BBC, Al Jazeera, New York Times. I can keep going. And they come and they write a story. That's helping shift the narrative. It's getting something out there. And, we hear about Ukraine, and the issue there was they produce all this wheat. Well, actually, they do produce a lot of wheat, but it doesn't go to people. It mostly goes to animals. And so the bottom line was, how do you tell the story in a different way on that? So 3 weeks ago, we had another invitation, and we're getting more and more people from the journalist world coming. We had 3 people from the New York Times and Scientific American, a really wonderful cross-section. And we had 5 global experts, Union of Concerned Scientists, and I can send you, I'd be happy to share these links because it was brilliant. For an hour and a half, we had people listening to things that they weren't going to get anywhere else. And to me, it's bottom up, using the intelligence energies of the people from the communities whose stories have never been told. And we need their stories more than we realize. And that wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything, that recently came out, is all about the importance of learning from the indigenous communities.
Yeah.
So
it's getting stories out to possibly people in the industrialized world who just are unconscious of the impact of the colonization and the capitalization, unfettered capitalization, and what it's doing. That's kind of the strategy where you see dialogue being useful.
It's a part of it, yes.
Yeah.
So let me, you had a question you wanted people to talk about Robert, in the small groups. Do you want to read it, or shall I read it out?
Sure, I'd be happy to have you read it.
Okay. So I'm going to put you in small groups for about 20 minutes to talk about what Robert has been saying. And the question that he'd like you to think through is, can dialogue be used to bring about a new relationship to power and injustice and the wrongs of the world? Welcome back.
Hello.
All right. So as we always do, Nancy's going to play a little background music, and we would like to invite you to put a question, something in chat, so that we can continue to make some inquiries of Robert. And when those questions are over, we can, of course, since we're a small group today, we can maybe do a little dialogue. So we'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll call on you and ask you to ask your question directly to Robert. Okay, so it looks like we have one really good question from Glenna. Would you like to go ahead and ask that, Glenna? And then maybe we'll open it up unless there's something.
Yeah, I see Beatrice has a question even before me, by the way. So my question, which I edited and didn't take out a word, but so Robert, I'm curious, what's the narrative you hold of how systems change happens through dialogue or within the collaboration of dialogue?
In terms of it making system change is what I assume you're asking about.
Yeah, in terms of it helping to shift a narrative at a large collective and systems level, like at a policy level, but also at the large collective consciousness level.
Yes, so I'm on a 3-minute alarm that Nancy says I should be on. So I will stick
2
to
minutes.
2 minutes? Okay, Tom, I'll do it 2 minutes. Tom. So the short answer is that every one of the organizations that we're working with, as I said, has a different focus and whether it be regionally or in partnership with others. Now, did my screen just get shared?
Yeah, you're good.
Good. Okay, so AGC works in certain areas. Others work in other areas. These are 6 conditions that hold the problem in place. And so the strategic orientation really assumes that you can change what's going on. It's the long view, as I call it, but it is important that as we look at, and there's another slide which talks about, the different major partners we have. And so for example, these are our global partners. Each of them are doing something different. But the regional partners, the ones that are in the Philippines or in Brazil or across Africa, or here one in Uganda, and this is a partial list. Each of them is getting familiar with how their strategies can make a difference. So the narrative change is about being very well attuned to what they can do and what they can't do, and how other organizations can work with them either locally or regionally, continentally, to push for system change by either changing the mental model or by changing policies, practices, relationships. Each of these is a little bit different. And so I see that I'm past Tom's cutoff, but I'll stop there and suggest that our approach is that the narrative can be shifted over time.
And what you're showing is Singy's model, is that correct, Robert?
Yeah, Peter Senge, who we've worked with in other work that I've done and my wife has done, is worked on this with others, and it's available if you Google 6 conditions that hold hold the problem in place, you will find quite a bit of information about this piece. It's very useful.
Do you want to ask the next?
Yeah, let's go back to Beatrice because her question was earlier. Beatrice, can you unmute?
Sure. Oh, yeah. No, I think I am unmuted, right? You hear me?
Are.
Yes.
You are unmuted. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm just curious whether any of you are familiar with the work of Adam Kahane. He's somebody that I discovered a couple of years ago and find very, he was just honored by Canada as some kind of Nobel Prize from Canada for his work, which he's done in various parts in Africa, in Colombia, as well as other parts of the world. And his process for bringing, I'm supposed to say collaborating with the enemy, but is very interesting. And it involves bringing people together from the full spectrum of diversity. In Colombia, it involved people with the FARC as well as with the government and military plus other actors, and putting them together. And he's got a whole process around that to get them to get to know each other and talk to each other. And he's focused on, they develop scenarios with no limitation. But anyway, I recommend them, and if people have heard of it, I would say great.
Yeah, I am familiar. I love the love and power approach that he is oriented to, and the shaman who I alluded to at the very beginning, that was the way he signed every letter, love and power. And I greatly appreciate the strength of that. And he's also very interested in the indigenous relationships that everyone has, including everyone here, whether it be, Timo in Finland got roots, and Tomas in Argentina, there's interesting roots, and there's a whole cross-section of people from the global South who are increasingly encouraging the development of strategies to help those in the global North reconsider their own roots as a way of anchoring to global issues, because we're so far removed from it by virtue of how we've been tying into and not even thinking. And I'm going to come back to dear Glenna, who sent out an email which included a Rumi poem the other day. And the operative line in it is, don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep. And so how do we keep ourselves awake? And is that not what David Bohm was talking about when he talked about proprioception in some fundamental way? Be conscious of what you're conscious of. Who is your farmer? What is the process by which you can anchor more deeply into activism, into action, into being an activist for things that matter for these next 7 generations?
Thank you.
Annette, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So my question is, what assumptions or attached beliefs are living in the question that was posed? And are those the ones we consciously want to continue to scaffold? And so I'm going to read that question that was posed one more time, because the question that was posed before our breakouts was, can dialogue be used to bring about a new relationship to power and the wrongs of the world? And I tried to intentionally catch with my volume and tone 3 pieces that caught me. And maybe I should say a little, I don't know, don't want to assume that other people understood where I was going with that. So
Go ahead.
I was sort of stirred. I was stirred by, can dialogue be used? And then I thought, that's like talking about it like it's a tool, okay? To bring about a new relationship to power Okay. And to me, that's like, well, what's your belief about power? Is it personal power, socialized power, power over power? So what is the worldview about power versus what is the dominant view about power? So it had its own connections. And the wrongs of the world. Again, that brings up this almost like that psychological, what are we looking at? The deficits, the wrongs of the world. That's as much as I can say for now, because if I said any more, I would be taking too much time and we couldn't still speak to it without me going into like in my head and conversational analysis.
I'm just wondering if it would be useful at this point to just open the conversation for everyone to respond to that question, as opposed to just leaving that question to Robert, because everyone struggled with that question. So can we just let people speak up? If you just unmute yourself and speak up when you're ready, and let's see what others came to around that question.
Well, I find myself wondering, Annette, what you think those assumptions and beliefs are. Like in asking the question, it seems to me that you probably, this is what I assume, have some sense of that there are assumptions and beliefs underlying the question, and that some of those assumptions and beliefs are things that you feel like perhaps we should not work to reinforce and continue.
Clarification's sake, what I'm saying is, I think unconsciously we can still be part of the old paradigm in the way we pose questions. And that's what I was trying to bring forth. So it's not about intentionality. Some of it is inadvertent, some of it is language based, but it was more of it just showed up, and I wanted to think about it.
I think you're onto something on that, because the can it be used does make it instrumental. So I had the same thought as what I've noticed in our conversation. I mean, this is a wonderful conversation, and Robert, I'm learning a ton from you. What I noticed too was that we immediately, we're getting more and more rich into conversation, dialogue, what is going on, and then we jump to this question about, well, how can this solve the problems of the world, right? We always go there. How can we make this bigger? And again, we're going into, how do we do with it? How do we use this, rather than, how do we deepen this in each of us or something? I just wonder if those questions about the solving the problems somehow catches us and goes into that instrumental thing that you're talking about. That is part of the problem.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that, Tom. That I've thought for some time that the only way we're going to impact the world is to change ourselves. That we can't do very much about impacting other people, but if we worked on ourselves, that if everybody worked on themselves, that we could come to a better place.
just a quick response to you, Annette, and I really want to hear others say. The operative phrase in there is a new relationship. To me, it's not changing as much as, if through dialogue, I think we can possibly come to a new relationship, and think and be more aware, since the growing culture is all about the effort to stimulate the narratives that open people up to the possibility that there's another way of being with this. So I just wanted to say that.
If I can, I'd like to just add one thing that I'm getting from the work of Richard Heinberg. Some of you know I'm doing this climate work under the name now of the Climate Dialogue Group. And Richard Heinberg has been very inspirational to us. And he has this concept of horizontal versus vertical power. And what I really hear you're working with, Robert, in your work in a growing culture is to work with the horizontal power to build that. And that's where that relationship becomes key. So I agree, Nancy, we have to work within ourselves, of course. And in working with ourselves, we reach out to others and form different forms of relationships, horizontal relationships, so that we don't keep building this unequal vertical structure that I think is what's so damaging right now in the world. This unchecked, continually growing top-down vertical power that's just raping the earth and causing us to march down the road that we're currently on.
And how does he go about suggesting we use horizontal power? Would you say a little more, Linda?
Sure. Well, he's written a book, and the name of it is Power. I have it over here. There's a subtitle, something about sustain. I'm not going to try to get to the subtitle, but he makes two points that we've taken, especially with the introduction of fossil fuel. We've used the Industrial Revolution on top of the use of fossil fuels to build an unsustainable global society, and that's what's killing. That's really what's killing us. So what he's trying to say is the only way we're going to stop the path that we're on is to somehow create societies that are more horizontally based. And I think that's what Robert is getting at within a growing culture, because as localization happens, the power relationships start to shift to those people who are actually farming the land themselves, who know the land intimately, so that these large industrialized companies don't come in and, without any local knowledge, just push people off the land and do their own thing and commoditize everything. If that makes sense. That's about the best I can do. And then the other point he makes, of course, which is an obvious one, is we can't continue to use fossil fuels. And because we can't continue to use fossil fuels, there will have to be a relocalization of everything in our economies, in how we are in relationship with each other, etc. Because we can't build sustainable systems fast enough to replace the westernized conveniences that we now all enjoy. And so again, that says relationship.
Howard, how are you thinking about this? I'm always interested in your perspective.
Well, I guess the one thing that Annette was kind of pointing at or something, I think that to me, it's about, like moving whenever we come up with solutions generally. I mean, they're helpful, I mean, often, but they're coming from the old background or something. I mean, and I feel like there's this change that we're proposing. It seems to need to come out of the working together to find it. I mean, rather than coming from a particular person's idea or something, I think we have to find a way to work this out together. I mean, as opposed to I've got an idea, you got an idea, you got an idea, because those tend to come out of the conditioning that we've gotten from the culture. The ideas are coming from the past versus like, how are we going to do this together? I mean, like what's getting in the way of us being able to openly collaborate with each other, which I think is what dialogue also offers, that opportunity to discover what's the obstacles to working together.
That's really beautiful, Howard. How are we going to do this together? I think you're right on with that answer.
And to my way of thinking, together includes what Kahane might be talking about in his book, The Enemy, right? Those people who have power and resource now, and have the capacity, if I think, if the will and the, if it all came together right, I don't even know what the it is, but if it all came together right, to switch to, sustainable energy, and, it doesn't have to be fossil fuels, and they can still use their factories to produce the stuff, it's not, I think we end up, the background from which we operate, it seems to me, is a background where we think we know exactly who they are and exactly what they're willing to do or not willing to do. And we label them that way, and they're the bad guys and we're the good guys, right? And so, that's not collaboration, I don't think,
That's right.
and that's not, looking at, opening up to the possibility of using the entire resource that exists here on planet Earth, on the human side, right? To be able to make a shift to where it is we feel we need to go, right? Or at least, a shift to the place that allows human life to continue to exist on this planet and to not further degrade or destroy other life on this planet, right? So, I mean, I just think we come from a place where we so, turn them into a monolith, and, that has no nuance and no diversity, right? And then demonize them. And then, we can't even, we can't even use the good that they might have and the capacity that they might have, right? So, I mean, I think we are stuck in a place. That's what I think.
That takes us out of a dialogical stance, right? That's what you're saying. Once we do that, we are out of dialogue. We are into then, so that's really interesting. And I did hear the other day that that idea from the early Christian movement of love your enemy was a new, that other religious traditions had love, but they didn't have the love your enemy piece. So that's what I think this is. I love collaborating with the enemy. Is that what it is, Kahan? That's really intriguing.
One of the anecdotes that Kahan relates about that work in Colombia was that at one of the sessions, he had identified somebody, he was bringing a new person in, and the guy arrived and he looked across the room and he got Kahan shook him on the arm and said, wait a minute, that guy over there had tried to have me assassinated 4 times. Like, what am I doing in this room with this guy? And Kahan's response, yeah, so it doesn't happen a 5th time that we're here. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
I think it's back to Bohm's original idea of fragmentation. If we just keep projecting onto the other that which we don't integrate, and that gets back to your idea, Nancy, we have to integrate ourselves so that we don't keep making the other, because it's not until we recognize that we're all in this together that we can ever make any progress forward. I was listening this morning. I don't know if I know, Annette, and some of you know Humanity Rising. It's this program that's on every day from 8 to 9:30. The guy that was on it tonight was going over the Supreme Court decisions, and he really got down to the roots yesterday and today about us evolving from chimpanzees, and chimpanzees have this fatal flaw. They'll be together in a tribe or whatever you call their family of being, and then when they get too big, they'll split it in half, and then they war with each other, and yet they used to be together. And apparently we do the same thing. We've always had war. We even here in the United States now, we've taken our political system to the nth degree, and we are now at war, in our political parties. It's crazy. It's insane.
Wow.
I think part of what I was bringing up was we're listening with soft ears. And I know that the intent was power with power, not to power, right? I know what the intent of the people in this room would be. That would be my felt sense, right? But there was a part of me that was like hearing the question and then still hearing that othering. And I think it's inadvertent. And I feel like that's what the magnet fragments of the environments and the cultures and this sort of like, I'm trying to figure out what the word would be to just I don't want to say dominant. I'm trying to come up with something that doesn't sound like it's a label, right? And normative. I don't even know if it's normative, right? But whatever those normative, it carries over into our language.
I don't want to push back, but I will push back. Because corporations, governments, not all, but many, don't give very much moment of thought to the kind of sensibilities that are being shared here. Colonialism, racism, I mean, there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen before being with the other is going to be useful. So, for example, most people think the enslaved people from Africa were brought over here for purposes of doing labor because it was needed in the South. Why were they brought over here? If you go drill down and you go to the history and you ask indigenous and African historians, because the best farmers in the world were there. They were stealing assets, extraction. And what did that accomplish? It basically built the economy of the South. It allowed for a substantial amount of money to be going back to Europe, which was in big debt. And the people in the North benefited by having a capacity to have more food. They built the country's economy. Now, how many of us knew that? I didn't know that that was the case. And I can trot out probably 7 or 8 other examples of something that I had to unlearn. And unlearning is a very important part. The discomfort of having others is not only about, it would be nice if we can communicate with them. The discomfort is that they are fundamentally in discomfort as well, sure, but there's a lot of learning everyone has to do, and they have to be part of that. So the same thing is true, by the way, of the whole notion of the westward expansion. Who were the people who were pushed west in this country? Timo's not from this country, but most of us are. The people who were pushed west were the lower income whites to be able to soften the blow of dealing with indigenous tribes. And there's history here. And I just think that the learning has to be much more sobering. We just don't know what we don't know. What we live in more than anything else is the unknown. And yet, unless we are going to tap into the creative assets of people in the global South and in many people here, we won't really hear their stories. And their stories have to be as much a part of the basis of our conversations with corporate leaders or anyone else that's been alluded to here as any other part of our communication. Those are some views.
Mhm.
Timo, I'd love to hear your thinking about this. Would you share what's going on in your mind?
Too many things at the moment. It's been it's been enlightening and inspirational to listen. So that's my thinking at the moment.
And Linda, Linda G, not Linda Eleanor, would you say a few words about what's coming to you out of this conversation?
Yeah, I was just going to put it in chat. We're making an assumption, I think, that the leaders of the world want to hear the stories. And I think that's where the dialogue comes in, is how do we make them want to, or not make them, but how do we open a doorway to have a dialogue so that they can hear those stories? I think that's key. I don't know how to do that, but I'd rather focus my energies that direction.
Linda, I think that was exactly what I was thinking when you guys were in your small groups. I even said that to Robert, like, okay, there must be another place for dialogue within the intersection between people hearing the stories, promoting those stories, maybe to university settings, to think tank settings, and eventually they need to seep into not-for-profit organizations and eventually into the government and corporate sector where they can actually be worked on. So how does that happen? How do we open those doors for those stories to kind of invade the consciousness of the very organizations that are doing so much harm in the world?
I'm not sure if this is apropos, but let me say it anyway, because it came to mind. And this was the story that I heard Peter Block say, probably he said it 20 years ago at a meeting that I was at. And he said he had been called to an organization by the president who wanted some help in changing the organization. And so he did what most of us would do, that he looked around the organization, talked to people, kind of stuff, and came back after his looking around and thinking with various people. And he said to the president, he said, I don't see that something is wrong here. He said, you're making a profit. You seem to be in good shape. You know, what is it that you're wanting? And he said that the president said to him, I have a son and a daughter who are graduating from college, and I wouldn't want them to work in this organization. So what the things that change people, they're very mysterious, aren't they? What would cause the president of a corporation that had been, driving people hard and so forth to suddenly say, I wouldn't want my children to be here? I think it's mysterious what causes insight to come to us. Or maybe the message is, don't give up on people because they aren't yet awake. I don't know what the message is of that, but the story came to mind and I've always loved the story.
As I talked about this inside myself over the last 2-3 weeks, the main learning for me was really about the difference between, and it reminds me of the Caucasian chalk circle quote, which talked about first comes the food and then comes the culture, right? And that's a Central European story, and it's beautiful. And it relates to what I was saying earlier about urgency. Having dialogue is a wonderful, relaxing service we can bring to the moment. And it's wonderful and relaxing service we can bring to the moment as consultants, which I was for 25 years. It's, and most of us who've worked in it, we're not dealing with Greek drama. We're dealing with the capacity to be of service to a setting. That is not urgency. It may feel urgent to somebody someone's going to be nervous, and it's possible someone's ox is going to be gored. But when we're talking really about, and I almost started this way, but I chose not to, a woman running for her life. I have it a video right here. I could play it because she was out there doing work, and the thugs who are now basically in charge of the new Filipino government were shooting at her and her colleague who were trying to help farmers. That's urgency. And if that is the norm, if that kind of setting is the norm in parts of Africa and in the other places that I've mentioned, dialogue is a natural default. It's not like they have to think about it. They damn well better listen to one another. So it goes to Annette's question somewhat, but I do think it's important for us to keep in mind that who is going to listen? How do we get corporations to listen? Is not as urgent as getting out the stories of those who there but for the grace of God go I. And it's true here in this country, even as we speak, for women particularly. And if you speak to Queen Quet of the Gullah Geechee and along the coast of South Carolina down to Florida, whose people have been in the islands there for hundreds of years, at least past the Civil War, whose land is being taken by large corporate skillful lawyers, it's urgent. So, and I'm sure that's true. I mean, Finland's joining NATO. It's urgent. So what do you do to get those stories out to enough people so that they're standing and sitting in the same kind of stance as they relate to their tomorrow? I don't know that.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Robert, maybe I could push back a little bit here, because it's not that I don't think you're right about the urgency, but I think there's something about how the urgency affects you and then how we let it affect us that trips us up. So that's where I go. Because it's that urgency is now, and tomorrow, that land will be taken. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about it today that's going to stop. So there's something here. I think we have to. How do we hold the urgency and not let it throw us off into anger or into something that's non-dialogical or something? That's the piece that I think you're missing.
Well, just a quick response, Tom. When I mentioned the woman in the Philippines as having joy in her, there's not anger. I'm not talking about getting angry. None of the people on the list I just held up are angry, are dealing with anger. And if I gave that impression that you better be angry, that's not my intention whatsoever.
Yeah, no, they're able to do it. So I'd love to know how to do that in my own life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your comment.
I see that we're 10 before the hour, and we would close by this time. And normally at this time we would say the next speaker is who's coming, and we're not going to have a speaker in August, so I can't announce a new speaker or a new interviewee. But maybe we each, if anyone else would just like to say a thank you to Robert or to someone else that has brought. I notice, and that's put the quote in around my. First comes the food and then comes the culture. If anyone else would just like to thank someone else before we go, maybe now's the time to do that, and then we'll end.
This has been very rich for me. I'm walking away from this conversation with a lot of a lot of rich thoughts. So thank you, Robert, and thank you, everyone.
I'll ditto that. Thank you, Robert, and everybody who's been talking in my small group. Really walking away with the question of how do we hold urgency and at the same time hold a view that of a new narrative that very well may take generations to show up. And yet we need to hold both. Yep. So thank you, Robert.
And Robert, I'd like to thank you for your passion, for your work. The world's going to benefit for sure. Has benefited.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really so glad for this dialogue and for your work, Robert. I now understand more deeply what you've been up to. And it's really given me a different way of holding this notion of power in a way that I think can lead to change. And as Glenna said, it's probably going to take a long time, but it's at least a pathway forward. And I don't think I have ever thought of it in quite that way until this dialogue. So I thank everyone who showed up and for making this such a rich time and for your work.
And I love the title of Kahane's book, Collaborating with the Enemy. That is what we have to do, isn't it? Collaborate with the enemy. And Sharon, you named that so well. It's how we view the other that prevents us from creating that collaboration. So thank you for the sharing you did today.
Well, I want to thank everyone. Also, I came kind of late to the party, not only late to this particular broadcast, but to the previous ones as well. And it comes at a very propitious time for me because I'm, like many of you, at that sort of semi-retired, changing gears mode, and I'm collaborating with the younger person here in the community I live in to see, put together a new, something. It's still taking shape here that will be in English and Spanish and multicultural, but looking at these issues of communication and collaboration and finding the way forward. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd like to thank everyone too. I guess I just had one comment about, I think that this notion of a fellow human being being the enemy is part of the problem. I mean, I think the behavior is the problem and the conditioning that we've gotten is the problem, but our fellow human beings are not really our enemy. They're actually our, like co-humans in this venture or something. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Robert, for inspiration, and thank you, Nancy and Linda and Lena for organizing this. And I missed the opportunity to say thanks to Tom and Glenna after our small group, which really gave me a lot of food for thought. And thank you everyone for reminding me why dialogue is important in these times when so many undialogic things are happening in Europe and everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, maybe on that wonderful note from Timo, we will end today, and hope maybe see you when we come back in September. And thank you so much, Robert, for today. You've really given us inspiration.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's been wonderful for me. Dialogue is alive and latent in all of us. And the long view is what I really believe in. And it's been inspirational for me with a growing culture that over hundreds of organizations can actually be collaborating in the very way that Howard was implying and reminding us the I-thou relationship is very important. So thank you all very much.